Good evening and welcome to the Velocity of Now with me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. We are on the RealityBitesRadio.com network and we're live all over the world on several other stations and channels too. It's September the 9th, 2015, and tonight is a very, very special show because two reasons. I've just got back from England after doing the Avebury Stonehenge segment of the upcoming documentary series Megalithic Odyssey, produced by Capricorn TV. And I've also decided tonight to read out the introductory chapter to my forthcoming book, which was intended to be two books originally, one dealing with Celtic mythology and one dealing with Norse mythology and how we can incorporate them into our lives in a certain sense. But also, I've been mulling over the ideas of my own, writing up about my own experiences with megaliths and visiting sacred sites over the year and ancient sites over the years, and realised that what I've written already for the two previous books, about 70% of both of them will fit nicely into this book in order to help conceptualize and give foundation and copper fasten the overall theory, which I will lay out to you in the introduction, which is an initial draft, so it'll probably be changed a little bit by the time this book is out, but at least it will give you a flavour of what's to come. It should be out before Christmas. I have a title, but I'm not going to tell you just yet because it's a beauty. And the main thing will be that I have the meat of the book done. I want to make it very readable, very entertaining, and very enjoyable, and a book that people will keep on their bookshelf and bring with them when they go visiting these places, and also be a very good reference guide with a comprehensive index, and I want to fill it with as many of my own illustrations as possible. As I said, the title of the book I'm going to withhold for a while, but it should be out by Christmas. I'm going to be filling it with a fair amount of illustrations. Actually, I was looking over my sketchbooks and I've done quite a few pen and ink drawings of various megalithic sites and other places and concepts of interest and artwork, which will suit this book perfectly. So it'll also have a comprehensive index, as I said, and it'll hopefully be a book that I'll even use myself, and it'll be a good reference source, and hopefully inspiration for many of the things I've actually spoken about concerning this subject on the show in the last couple of years. Now, before I get to reading that, I want to mention that the Mystery School road trip film that's being run between myself and Mark Metascience has gone over the £1,000 mark. So we've reached our first major milestone in terms of funding. So thank you all, everyone who's contributed to that. It's going to be a great film, and I'm looking forward to producing that with Mark Metascience. And if you want to keep contributing, and remember, the more money we have, the better the production will be. This is the whole idea, to actually produce something that will look good, sound good, and deliver useful information. You can go to thomassheridanarts.com, my website, and you'll see a button down there called Special Announcement. And click on that, and it tells you the details of how to get to the site. Or you can type Mark Metascience Mystery School road trip into Google, and it will bring you to that page on his own website. And that that's really ticking along now, and I'm delighted with that. Thank you for everyone. So Thomas Sheridan Arts is probably the easiest way to get to that. And if you're on my website there, you want to buy a book or something, just click on the bookshop tab above, and that would help me out. So thank you very much for that. As usual, I know we've had some sound problems tonight, but as usual, the show will go up onto my YouTube. I don't mean as usual we have sound problems. I mean as usual, the show, no matter. Sorry about that. I thought we were off the air again. I feel like Sue Simmons on the TV in New York when she said, "What the fuck are you doing?" to the guy behind the screen. But we're still on the air. Paul is keeping us going. So yeah. Anyway. Now I'm all worried. Now I wasn't nervous before I went on there, and now I'm all tense and wired up. I was all relaxed after my megalithic odyssey down in the south of England, visiting the sites. I'll talk about that a little bit later, and also in relation to the incredible synchronicity and enormous news that happened while we were there, and which also gave me the first paragraphs to the introductory opening of the new book, the forthcoming book, which was synchronistically perfect. And so I would like to read that out to you tonight. Hopefully we won't go off the air. It was a beautiful summer's afternoon in early September 2015 when something of an epiphany came over me, as myself and my co-presenters of the documentary series Megalithic Odyssey were filming on location at the Woodhenge site in Wiltshire, England, within an area which was once the site of a massive Neolithic timber circular structure. Today, Woodhenge is represented only by mundane and weathered short concrete stumps placed there to indicate the location of the original wooden poles. The monument at Woodhenge has long since rotted away, yet, even with only the crude concrete place markers remaining, the psychic monument of the location itself is emotionally and psychologically still very powerful. The very perceptive, real energy of the Woodhenge site itself and the purpose for which it was constructed still remains intact within the negative spaces of the observer's consciousness, transporting us to a place located in and out of space-time between the material world and the other world, which are only partly hidden within the movements and the reflective colours of the shadows which both our sun and the moon cast across the landscape. What the ancient Irish called the fifth province of Meath, a location unseen by the human eyes, but as real and as dynamic as the very literal cosmos of our five senses. As I looked around at the pastoral vista surrounding Woodhenge, the true nature of the location as being but one element within the overall Stonehenge complex of Wiltshire became readily apparent. Although Woodhenge itself, in the material sense, does not have the outstanding and awesome colossal remains of its close neighbour, Stonehenge, the missing spaces where the wooden poles once stood tall, nevertheless, are no less emotionally and psychologically capable of a soft impact collision with the human psyche of the observer. Woodhenge still stands, but not within this reality. The long-gone organically decayed monument at Woodhenge still has power over us because it is but a single footprint on a profoundly important landscape which comprises the entire Stonehenge region's visual, psychological, cultural and emotional experience. This same experience is likewise prevalent at other similar sacred sites such as Carrowkeel in Ireland and many other mysterious Neolithic complexes. I use the term experience very much on purpose here in order to illustrate the unseen intuitive nature of these locations when we visit them with an open mind and, more importantly, an open heart. The real and invaluable power of these monuments such as Woodhenge lies beyond their still remaining stones and earthen mounds, as they are not merely just tombs, temples or tourist destinations. They are also living and breathing ancient repositories of necessary experiences for us to engage with, and which then, if we begin to read and feel their messages, become the portal gateways to the fifth province of the unseen cosmos. Incredibly, at the precise moment within this version of space and time that my fellow co-hosts Maria Wheatley and James Swagger and I were discussing the mysteries of the possibilities of Woodhenge, and in particular its relationship to both the nearby Stonehenge complex itself, which includes the adjacent Durrington Wall Superhenge, that the world's media, unknown to any of us at that moment, was in a great state of excitement reporting that Stonehenge too had been discovered under the very same embankment at the same Durrington Walls, which we had been contemplating as the press release on the discovery of what was immediately referred to as Stonehenge 2 were being reported around the world. A message from the fifth province was delivered via the courier of the collective unconsciousness. While I was having my own personal revelation that the mysterious lexicon of the ancient sites of Europe are best uncovered using an overall holistic approach based on applying everything from archaeology to mythology, archetypes, all implied in tandem by observing cultural manifestations that perhaps the most incredible group synchronicity of my entire life was unleashed. This spiritual experience, for that is what it felt like, in the most clearest descriptive sense to me, fused the material world of the experience with the fifth province of knowing, all taking place at the same time that academics and ordinary people around the world were in a state of great excitement at the discovery of the literal remains of approximately 100 or so huge stones discovered using ground penetrating radar technology a few meters below the embankment of the Durrington walls, and other nearby structures also discovered, including a large timbered hall, finally validating the Lawn Hill assumption that the Stonehenge complex was one of the largest human settlements in Europe during the Neolithic era. Prior to this remarkable synchronicity, I had been researching the idea that the Druids of pre-Roman Christian Europe, rather than having been wiped out with the advent of Christianity, had instead went underground within the emerging power structures of the new order of Roman laws, taxation, and culture, that instead of allowing themselves to be annihilated as pagan martyrs, sacrificed by the traumatic changes of the era's politics, religion, and culture, they had instead become, as Merlin, who was based on a very real Welsh warrior hermit seer named Mithrin Willith, described as being the son of a devil and a servant of God, playing the Roman game, so to speak, but not in the game as such, a hidden druid within the power structures of the Roman imperial world. This may also explain why St. Patrick insisted that only priests ordained at a Manmacha site near the present-day Armagh in Ulster were the only ones to be trusted to deliver the Gospels to the native Irish, as he had likely become aware that several Druids, snakes if you will, had infiltrated the early Irish church following the fall of Tara. In a sense, these Druids were akin to heathen fifth columnists, keeping the fifth province alive for future generations from within the centres of global power and influence. What happened at Woodhenge on that glorious afternoon of synchronicity, magic, memory, and experience finally proved to me that Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious was an undisputed fact. Within this twilight shadow world there are networks of unseen threads woven through the fabric of the material and corporeal universe. In much the same way the Norns of the Norse Eddas weave the destiny and fate of all living things next to the well of Unhandrun at the foot of the Yggdrasil tree. As two beautiful swans, an important symbol discussed throughout the course of this book, swim and feed in the waters below, that such synchronicities allow us to read the ongoing transmissions of the Druidic and earlier shamanic traditions of Western Europe as a kind of transneural network of archetypal and the elemental, accessible for anyone who is willing to log into its awesome and empowering potential for creativity and understanding. The fifth province of Meath admits all who arrive there as transmigratory emigrants and explorers, and then stamps their visitor's visa with synchronicity and even mystical revelations. This is precisely what happened to myself and my Megalithic Odyssey co-hosts on that sunny afternoon in Wiltshire, when by default we had logged into this network, and in my own case also answered my question concerning the survival of the Druidic and European shamanic underground, existing right to the very present. The other world of the fifth province is there for anyone to tap into once they have the correct software, that being the ability to explore the symbology and sequestered narratives of European and other comparative mythologies such as the Vedas, and secondly, by possessing the hardware itself, visiting the actual locations, sacred landscapes and monuments of the ancients. Then we can begin to learn to navigate our way around the fifth province, which is there waiting for all of us to explore and incorporate its abundant gifts of wisdom and creativity into our own lives if we wish to do so. This book will also be a useful feed guide and reference source to take readers on a journey through the megaliths and ancient pre-Christian sites of Britain, Ireland, and other regions around Western Europe. Along with this, I hope to provide a valuable resource of the complementary mythologies, insights, and histories in tandem with describing the spirituality, rituals, interpretations, and traditions associated with these sacred sites, along with their gods, goddesses, and their associated festivals, thereby availing of something of an accessible template from which anyone can begin to explore these places and ideas, and from this open up one's own personal connection to a more holistic understanding and creativity within the context of the journey itself. This will be a guidebook not merely to the stones and sacred sites of our ancestors, it will also function by osmosis as a roadmap of the human condition as we reflect upon the world of our ancestors. In many ways, the same challenges which the Druidic and heathen traditions of Europe were confronted with in the past, from the time of Julius Caesar to the age of the Vikings, with the onslaught of the Roman Empire and later by unleashing its most successful weapon, the Bible, we humans today are now facing similar challenges with the advent of smart technologies in the technocratic society. In particular, the rise of the transhumanist and posthumanist digital crusades, by which a new technological caste system is being imposed upon us all in order to weed out the humans who are no longer compatible with the psycho-digital new order of the future, while at the same time improving all the mistakes that natural selection has created in the humans who will be eventually chosen to be the cybernetic patricians of the future. In terms of our own natural humanity in the technocratic age of the globalists, the future is looking increasingly bleak for anyone who's perfectly happy just enjoying their life as an imperfect human within a somewhat vicious limitation of the emerging paradigm. The digital dark magi of the technocratic new order have made no bones about the fact that we humans, as we are now, are an obsolete model to be either selectively upgraded or discontinued. The supreme irony in all this being they themselves haven't evolved since the time their own ancestors were throwing people to the lions for sport, while declaring the barbarians around them to be uncivilized and in need of a Roman rules and culture regardless of if they wanted it or not. At the same time, this new trauma of transhumanism and posthumanism is being foisted upon us by the new Caesars and pontiffs of the digital electromagnetic spectrum. There is not surprisingly a type of awakening also happening in tandem with this. More and more people are looking towards the world of pre-Christian consciousness of our ancestors. Television shows such as Vikings, despite its stereotypical faults, are gaining huge global audiences who are now aware of the Eddas and the Sagas in numbers not seen since the so-called Dark Age. The discovery of Stonehenge too, beneath the Durrington walls, created as much excitement worldwide as the hype of the latest smart device in the world's media. Visitor numbers to places such as Newgrange and Tara in Ireland and other ancient sites continue to rise. More books than ever are being published dealing with megalith Stonehenges, cave art, heathen magic, European mythology and ritual magic. People watch the television show Game of Thrones and read the books, coming away more fascinated by the wildlings beyond the wall rather than the imperial dynasties to the south of it. This cultural phenomena shows no signs of waning either. It is said that science fiction is the gateway drug to space exploration and cosmology. If this be true, then fantasy and mythology is quickly becoming the gateway drug to the fifth province for millions of people today. Our first step into that territory has to begin somewhere, no matter how twee, commercial, or indeed academic or spiritual the initial engagement is for the individual and how they might choose to experience it. Be it an intriguing spine title on a volume buried on the shelf of a New Age bookstore catching our attention, or a character in a fantasy TV show whose heathen roughness becomes appealing to us, or indeed a Hollywood, now there is a druidic echo from the past, movie filmed with re-engineered versions of the same archetypes found within the Irish annals, the Norse Eddas, Arthurian legend, and the Saxon folk tales, or choosing to avail of a shamanic entheogenic substance, or descending into a deep cave underground in order to read the markings left on a wall by some individual thousands of years previously. From meditating in the groves of an old woodland to enjoying the novels of J.R. Tolkien are all equally valuable steps, when taking the journey across the frontiers of this reality and into the initial hinterlands of the fifth province. In the 1960s, Professor Julian Jaynes published The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, in which he proposed that people in ancient times had a very different type of consciousness than humans have today. This might explain how these people built structures such as Stonehenge using methods that even the most proficient engineers of our time can only still speculate upon. If our ancestors, and I believe they did, possessed a very different type of consciousness, and thereby from this a completely different experience of their personal and communal existence, then the incredible efforts to build structures such as Stonehenge would not be considered pointless or beyond reasonable effort. Perhaps the very clock speed itself of their brains was so vastly different to modern humans that they did not fret or struggle with the task of taking an entire century of effort to move the blue stones from the Preseli Hills in Wales to the Stonehenge site on the Salisbury Plain, and then spend decades more dressing and erecting the stones. Today we think nothing of applying enormous intellectual and technical efforts and resources on a global scale in order to keep the world's economy running, itself a fiscal and monetary philosophy which at its initial level is purely ephemeral and conceptual. Would you rather be part of a society which leaves monuments such as Stonehenge, Avebury, Karnak, Tara, along with the thousands we know of and the many more sacred sites lost or yet to be discovered, which keeps surprising us with recent discoveries such as Stonehenge too, to awe and amaze us to the present day, while at the same time the cultural furnaces of mythological archetypes and legends still burn deeply within the personal subconscious? Or would you rather be part of a culture which leaves nothing but quantitative easing, upgrades of new electronic gadgets, which will never offer any human a roadmap to their own personal and cultural evolution? The efforts put into creating Stonehenge and other monuments like it does not seem so pointless now when you look at it this way. Human social evolution is in many ways a truncated experience of personal and cultural evolutionary interruptions resulted in psychosocial triggers often brought about by or as a reaction to trauma and catastrophe. It is my belief that a major natural disaster occurred in Europe from 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, and the resulting human trauma unleashed by cataclysmic geographical and environmental losses created the megalith need within our ancestors, not only to deal with the major submergence of the landscape and the peoples who lived on it, but also this disaster forcing the people living between the Danube and the Atlantic fringes to switch to large-scale agriculture in order to survive. However, this survival came at a terrible price, losing the far more independent, magical and exciting world of the hunter-gatherer, which came to an end. Everything changed, from the role of the genders within the society to new concepts of routine and seasonal labour. A new consciousness was developing as a result, and this had to be ritualized by the shamans within the regions where the population managed to survive this disaster. The creation of megaliths and mythologies served both to ease the population to the new order of agriculture with as little psychological trauma as possible, while also changing their consciousness and society in order to deal with the social and personal shockwaves this unleashed. The shamanic and later druid factions tapped into the synchronicities of the fifth province as magic and ritual became the mother of Neolithic agrarian survival. Although our ancestors may have lost much when they moved from hunting to ploughing, what they produced in terms of archaeology and mythology was magnificent and powerful and still remains standing, both within the landscape around us and within the psychic inner landscape of our consciousness, as both ethereal gifts from the past, which are with us to this very day. As we move further into the 21st century, as both our society and as individuals, we face a similar sense of trauma with the onset of the technocratic new order. Even so, the fifth province of the unseen, which communicates to us in the language of art, magic, synchronicity, and especially mythology, remains with us for the druids of this age to guide us towards continual spiritual survival and new expressions of creativity. The journey begins once again by going back to the places and mythologies from where it all began as we walk among these stones and place ourselves within the mythology as we search for the land called High Brazil to some, Tir na Nog and Avalon to others. What does it all really mean? Get your hiking books, maps, and sagas ready, as we are about to find out as we retrace the footsteps of the ancients with new eyes and open hearts. And that's the intro in its rough form. It's only a first draft. We'll probably change a little bit of the forthcoming book just to give you a taste of what I've been working on and thinking about for the last year or so, and many years before that regarding the megaliths. I'm ready to tell this story and I look forward to doing it. I want to do it properly and I want to produce a book that not only I'll be proud of, but people will be proud to own. So I hope that certainly and hopefully whetted your appetite. Sorry about the loss of transmission there. At one point I even went to the wrong page, but that happens. Anyway, so as I said, I was over in England, and while I was there, this Stonehenge too was discovered. It was just unbelievable. We were literally at the Woodhenge site. I was really getting buzzed at this place. I was getting more. Now the Woodhenge is nothing. The previous day we got private access into the monoliths at Stonehenge, and I got right up next to the stones. I took some wonderful photographs. I felt the energy. It's just amazing how Stonehenge stands at the top of that plain, and the most unmegalithic and natural thing you see, apart from the A303 road which runs near it, is the military bases in the distance. And this is why we need to tell these stories. Why do the military co-opt and usurp these sites? And these areas are also filled with with UFO sightings. This is all secret military technology being tested, and I believe a lot of it is rooted in discoveries they made regarding consciousness that came as a result of them owning these sites like Stonehenge, or not owning them, but well, they did own them for a while, but examining them. And you get these hippies that go down there, and these New Agers, and they see these lights, and they go, "Oh, the space rudders have arrived." And what they're seeing is the digital gin that's probably been manufactured by NATO. Sadly, however, when you get into the center of that stone monument, the Stonehenge, you literally feel like your batteries are being charged. Also, the sounds are different in there. It's something you cannot explain to anyone. That when you're in there talking to someone, it sounds like back in your head, you're hearing your voice in a completely new way for the first time. Do you remember when you first spoke into a cassette recorder as a kid and you played the tape back and you were shocked at the sound of your voice when you said to yourself, "That isn't me"? Usually your accent was much stronger on the tape than you expected, because the vocal cords are transmitting a sound that's very different than the one you're creating in your brain and your cognition at the same time. Well, that happened at Stonehenge. The sound was different, and it also happened at West Kennet Longbarrow, when we went up there, myself and James, and went into it, and I brought with me for the filming a tone generator, and brought the tone generator into one of the chambers, and it went absolutely mental. It behaved and did things that it shouldn't have done, apart from the fact that it showed that the stones work similar to a pipe organ, in that the chambers and the layers of the stone themselves change pitches, but it also affected the digital electronics in the phone, and it was on where I had the tone generator in, as if almost this was the war between the analog and the digital, the analog druid and the digital wizard, dark magi, that I spoke about at AV6 last year. And this was the front line of it, and I'm beginning to experience this more and more. Woodhenge has nothing but concrete stumps in the ground. Yet, while I was there, I could describe the experience as only being spiritual. I had the most spiritual experience at a place where the monuments had decayed and rotted away, and all that was left was concrete place markers in the ground. And I found this very surprising, and the reason why was I was there, and we were there at the moment Stonehenge 2 was revealed to all. Now, I want to read this article from the BBC News that just came out today, and we'll talk through this. I think there's not only synchronicities here in terms of many of the things we're talking about, but why are they doing this now? Why are they releasing this now when they've known it for a while? The article is called Stonehenge Secrets Revealed by Underground Map, written by Maria Disi in Espungi, or something like that, who's a science reporter in Birmingham. Archaeologists have unveiled the most detailed map ever produced of the earth beneath Stonehenge and its surrounds. They combine different instruments to scan the area to a depth of 3 meters, which is about 9 feet, with unprecedented resolution. Early results suggest that iconic monument did not stand alone, but was accompanied by 17 neighbouring shrines. Future detailed analysis of the vast collection of data will produce a brand new account of how the Stonehenge landscape evolved over time. Among the surprises yielded by the researchers are traces of up to 60 huge stones or pillars which form part of a 1.5 kilometre wide superhenge previously identified as the nearby Durrington Walls. There's a couple of superhenges actually all over the place. There's a few in Ireland as well. For the past 4 years, we have been looking at this amazing monument to try and see what it's about. Professor Vincent Gabney from the University of Birmingham said to the British Science Festival. The research is also described in a BBC documentary which is to be screened, surprise, surprise, this Thursday, which I believe will be September 11th, or is it Friday? I'm not sure. What was within this landscape? Most of the land surrounding Stonehenge has not been surveyed in this manner before, Professor Gaffney. The project lead researcher said one key question always remained. Was it really an excluded place where only special people would come? The teams, that's the elite mentality getting again. You see, one of the problems, and I've written about this in the book, is that these academics are trying to pour a 20th century analytical mind into a Neolithic consciousness. It will not work. It's like trying to operate a Mac software on Windows. You can't do it, or a Windows software on Mac. So they come up with this whole thing that it was special, and also that serves these sort of like fake druids who go to these places today, who are all high-ranking Freemasons and big shots, and that this idea of Stonehenge being exclusive, and they're trying to do the same in Ireland now with this Winster Souls test, plays into this idea. It brings the caste system into a place where there probably was no caste system. The team's new three-dimensional map, which covers an area of 12 square kilometres, or 1,250 football fields, shows that this was not the case. Researchers used just like in Egypt when they found that the people lived the builders of the pyramids lived around the pyramid. Researchers used 6 different techniques to scan the whole area at different depths below the surface. Amongst their instruments was a magnetometer, a ground-penetrating radar, and a 3D laser scanner. Nisar Karim, a researcher at the University of Leicester, used similar instrumentation to reconstruct 16th century Tudor tombs. She told the BBC, using GPR and other techniques, the researchers have been able to virtually see through the ground and explore what civilization looked like thousands of years ago. Under one of the numerous mounds, they identified a 33-meter long timber building, about 6,000 years old, probably used for ritual burials and related practices. You see, it's always burials. It couldn't have been a 6,000-year-old hall. The first thing that pops into their mind is burials. Now, yes, in some of these places, but not at West Kennet Long Barrow, I don't think, but at some of these places, sometimes bodies have been found. But that doesn't mean that the original purpose was to act as tombs. Later cultures and later versions of the same culture could have then decided to make them tombs. Or maybe they were multi-phase use, they were tombs and other things at the same time. Remember, prior in the Mesolithic age, people, they died in the open, and you just wait, and you just waited for the ravens to pick you apart. In the Neolithic age, it was common to put people up on these racks where the ravens would come down and pick the bones clean. This is where the Morrigan comes from in the Celtic tradition, and the Valkyries in the Norse tradition, Nordic tradition. And then the bones would be taken down and cleaned and interred inside there. It's not really a burial when you think about it. That's more like it's more like a tribute. Back to the article. Excarnation, that's called. When they put you up on top of a rack and let the birds strip your flesh away. Actually, I wouldn't mind going that way myself. The building has 3 rows of roof-bearing posts. It is around 300 square meters and slightly trapezoidal, which is interesting because the same period on the continent, about 100 or 200 years earlier, we find this type of trapezoidal building relating to megaliths, giant stones, said Professor Wolfgang Neubauer, director of the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute, which was involved in the research. That's because it was the same before this catastrophe that submerged Doggerland and all the land connecting Ireland to Britain, Britain to Europe, Britain to Orkney and Shetland, Denmark across the Doggerland to the north of England, the coastlines near that extended farther out to sea at Carnac in Brittany and down around into Iberia. Before they all sank, there was the same culture. This is the way the stories are the same, the archetypes are the same, and you even have it all seems to have started with the Beaker people. Between the Danube and the west coast of Ireland. Another 17 mounds revealed previously unseen monuments about the same age as Stonehenge itself. The dating was done based on their shape. You see, based on their shape, I mean, to me that's not. You see, this is how speculative the dating is, and even carbon dating is so discredited now that they actually have to look at the shape of a building or see what level it is in the strata to date them. That's really guesswork. We know that some of these things look like so we can classify them, Professor Gaffney explained. A first inspection of the cursus and the Durrington walls, located north and northeast. The cursus are these long processional walkways, and northeast of Stonehenge, also revealed new insights. The work unveiled 2 additional pits inside the prehistoric cursus, an enormous elongated circular trench originally named because it reminded the discoverers of a Roman racing track. There you go. See, it had to be Rome. Up until the 1960s, many archaeologists who were looking at Tara, Newgrange and other places were convinced these things were built by Phoenicians, Romans or Greeks. They could not get it into their heads that the ancient people of this part of the world had the technology to do this because they were not Romans. This bigotry still infects. It's a Roman racing track. Absolutely ridiculous. They even call them that in Ireland, where the Romans never even came to. The particular alignment is closely related to the position and orientation of Stonehenge, which was built as we know it some 300 to 500 years later. The large separation in time indicates that both monuments were not conceived or planned as a whole. Well, I disagree with that, because as I mentioned in the opening of my book, if we're dealing with people who are very different consciousness, the clock speed of their brains will be different than what we experience now. They will be very similar to how we think of animals. The animals, they say, like a dog that has set, a dog is 3 years old, he's really 21. That, so then to say that just because there was a huge difference in time doesn't mean that they're not part of the same complex, because their minds worked very differently. The large separation in time indicates that both monuments were not conceived and planned as a whole. That's like saying the old part of a cathedral that was built and the completed cathedral that was built, that was finished 500 years later, were not part of the whole. The structures guide the builders. Once you have some things in place, other things happen because those already exist. Profaned Professor Gaffney. That's kind of interesting. If you look at the monuments in Brittany, the ones around Lacquer Mariquer in Brittany, there was loads, and that's near where Karnak is. There's the biggest single monolith ever constructed, the broken menhir. They call upright stones, standing stones in Brittany, menhirs. The broken menhir, because it is broken, of Ergra, it has artwork on it. The thing was quarried and was moved several kilometers from the quarry to the site where it was erected in one single piece, and erected in one single piece. And get this, it weighed 280 tons. 5,000 years ago, a Neolithic community in Brittany moved a block of stone that weighed 280 tons, and with that 17 other huge blocks that were roughly the same size. They were all smaller, but they were still enormous. All that distance, and then erected them as standing stones. Now, what makes them interesting is that the broken menhir at El Gra had a depiction, and I've actually got drawings of it in my sketchbook, which I'll put in the book, of a farming tradition in Loch Marier, and the stone, the top of the menhir snapped off, and it became later on the capstone of the table de Marchand Dolmen. And we know this because the artwork is on the top of the remains of the standing upmere, and the rest of the artwork is on the underside of the dolmen, obviously facing into the portal. And you see this all the time. I saw this in Donegal a few weeks ago and in other places, that the underside of the dolmen is dressed and the upper side is left natural. This is to communicate with the other world. So that's really interesting. That is, you see, that really, really fascinates me, that stuff. Anyway, he and his team also found evidence of huge stones or timber posts lying 3 meters below the mounds that form the Durrington walls. These solid blocks completely refined the development of the walls, he told the BBC. All these preliminary findings reflect the complexity of the landscape's history and evolution, which will be slowly uncovered once the researchers start an in-depth analysis. The analysis will reveal more precisely how the soil evolved through the ages. We are starting to see the growth of fields encroaching on it. That's important because it tells us about a changing relationship to Stonehenge, Professor Gaffney said. Eventually we will see the living returning, bringing agriculture. It becomes more of an ecology of the mundane rather than the arcane. I don't know what that meant. Dr. Nick Snasnall, National Trust archaeologist from the Aberry and Stonehenge World Heritage Sites, said that using 21st century techniques, the Stonehenge Hidden Landscape team has transformed their knowledge of the ancient, precious and very special landscape. I like him better. Their work has revealed a clutch of previously unsuspected sites and monuments, showing how much of a story of this world-famous archaeological treasure house remains to be told. You see, they keep using the word that sorry, excuse me, hold on a second. They keep using this idea that the monuments evolved, but they didn't. You go to these places, they don't really evolve. What they often do is they change. Like in the Owenigat cave in Roscommon that we climbed down into, there is an Ogham stone that has, Ale, son of Maeve, meaning Queen Maeve. that Om stone was probably originally upright on the exterior of the original kind of flashy entrance to the caves, and was turned around and put in as a lintel. Now that's interesting, because that might prove that the Om script is much older than they're claiming, and from my perspective may have been an intermediary secret language that the hidden druids within the power structures were creating to transmigrate the narratives and the stories from the old ways to the new Christian ways in an encryption that the Latin speaking Christian priests and monks would not have been able to read. And that's why it was only around for a limited time, I believe. So they're not so much evolving these sites, but they're constantly almost retuning them. They're almost retuning them by moving the structures around or changing them. Like, why was Woodhenge never replaced with stones? That's interesting in itself. There's theories that Woodhenge represents the land of the living, where Stonehenge represents the land of the dead. I don't believe any of those things are true, although Woodhenge does have a powerful energy about it. So, on top of this, we have, you see, the great tragedy, and I keep saying this week after week, the great tragedy of England is the Normans ethnically cleansed their folklore. They ethnically slaughtered not only the people of the harrowing of the north, but also through their sort of supra-Romanist administrative function of laws and super taxes, including later on King John the Doomsday Books, which is in Salisbury Cathedral, which is a stone throw away from the Stonehenge Museum. They culturally cleansed England, so therefore you don't have in England the voluminous amount of written material that you would have for the Irish Annals, the Norse Eddas, and even in Europe, in Britain. You don't have it. And so this is why when you talk to English people about this stuff, they say, all we have is a few scraps of paper on the Druids. What do we know? Well, you have a few scraps of paper on the Druids because the Romans and the Greeks wrote that down. But that's not the sum total of the entire archive of work out there. And plus, you also read between the lines. People say that you can't trust the Annals and you can't trust the Eddas because they're written by Christian monks. Well, I believe that those ones who wrote them were actually the hidden druids within inside the system who were keeping it alive, just like the ones who were using the Om strip. I believe that there was a secret network of druids within these early Christian churches who were keeping the fire alive. You get hints of this time and time again. St. Patrick's paranoia that only priests under his direct control at the ecclesiastical centre of Armagh would be allowed to preach the Gospels. Nobody else. That shows extreme paranoia, that he didn't trust the other monastic institutions to root out the snakes, so to speak. And we know Merlin was a real character. And we know that many of the Irish mythological stories scream of symbology and symbolism. Specifically stories like the Children of Lear. Now we're back to the swans again. The swans are a very important archetype. But the Children of Lear is a story that begins in the pagan world and ends in the Christian world. And along the way, you get a sense of guidance that the heathen soul has been lost, but it has not been destroyed, because there are druids and mystics and priests along the way who help them, the children. And there's other stories like this, and they go on and on and on. It's okay to romanticize these sites. It's okay, not to the sense of, say, these modern druids and these hippies and new agers. I'm talking about the feeling it has inside you. This is why I sketched them, and I sketched them directly in pen and ink, because if I make a mistake, I cannot rub it out. It's very similar to working with stone, to carving and sculpting stone. If you make a mistake, you cannot patch the stone up. While I stand there, and James got some nice footage of me at Avebury sketching one of the stones, you become, in a sense, more insightful of the consciousness, of the very different consciousness of the ancients who built these things. It's the whole thing has to be ripped up and torn up and started all over, I believe. And I believe that many of us are now doing this. I'm not the only one. The archaeology and the approach to these ancient sites today directly comes out of a Romanist, academic, bigoted way of thinking, which was supplemented in the Victorian era by British Israelism. And along the way, you did not have a respectful, shall we say, nor useful understanding of our past. What you had was a Trojan horse that presented you a history, an understanding, an archaeology of these sites, but inside it was the same bunch of Romans. We are left in a situation where we're having to not only decipher the archaeology, mythology, and understanding of these sites and the people of the Neolithic and before and after, as well as the shamanic and druidic nature of them, but also we're having to dig beneath the archaeology of Romanist academic bullshit that was then heaved upon them. I'm drawing a line in the sand, and I know others are too. And we've had enough of this desecration of the achievements, culture, and mind of our ancestors. And we're going to restart and look over and begin to reanalyze what this all means. And I guarantee you, within a couple of years, if I can change the understanding of what psychopaths mean to people around the world with a simple book that I wrote back in 2011, I know I can achieve at least the same thing on a smaller scale, or who knows, maybe even it to the equal of the story of our ancestors and why they walked among the stones. That's the show for tonight. Sorry about the technical things. There's nothing we can do about it. If you go later on this evening, in a couple of hours from now, to Thomas Sheridan Arts on YouTube, you'll get the entire program without interruptions in crystal clear quality. Good night. Keep embracing that synchronistic magic, because I'm proof it exists this week, and start excavating the truth behind the bullshit that has been plowed upon us for the last 2,000 years or so. Good night, and feck 'em if they can't take a joke.